Living in a hoochie, huh? Yeah, it has a nice ring. Hoochie's around the punch bowl. Hoochie's around the punch bowl? Is that like a new drinking game? Huh? In the most real sense imaginable. Okay. Yeah. August 19th, 1951. It's been 2.5 months since there was any big action in the field, and then it was the UN forces advancing after defeating the Communist Spring Offensive. But that lull ends this week. For this week, the South Koreans attack. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, the peace negotiations at Kaesong were stalled ever more by the question of the 38th parallel. Will it or will it not be the demarcation line? The Chinese and the UN are each adamant that it will and it won't, respectively. There was also an ever-growing issue with neutral zone violations, and UN Commander Matt Ridgway was ever more frustrated as he thinks those might be deliberate sabotage. There is a new one this week. On the 13th comes a strafing attack by UN planes on 3 communist supply vehicles. There are protests, and UN Chief Delegate Turner Joy's response is, in view of the fact that no notification of this movement was received, no action on the part of United Nations Command is necessary and none is contemplated. However, because of this sort of stuff, the communist side asks for the liaison officers to meet and make arrangements to prevent it. Their agent is one Colonel Chang, and the UN once again has Andrew Kinney, backed by Marine Colonel James Murray. They've had a few meetings recently, but a new incident then happens today, the 19th. A platoon of Chinese MPs near a village in the neutral zone are ambushed. Their leader is killed and one other guy is wounded. The communists immediately accuse the UN of breaking the agreements. The UN will investigate, of course, so we'll see what happens with that likely next week and how that might affect the talks. But the war continues even as the talks do. US 8th Army, sitting there at the Kansas line, can't just sit around forever. But when the active fighting, the advance, ended in June, it did so with lines that left much to be desired. There were salients or bulges here and there, no man's lands, things that could or should be fixed from a purely military standpoint. And with the talks dragging on and on, Washington has felt that military pressure might be a good thing to kickstart them into a higher gear. They are now ready to apply such military pressure. The idea, though, is not to march north to the Yalu River or to open up the enemy defenses for a devastating war of movement. Nope. The attacks now are limited in zones and are designed to pressure the enemy at the truce table and to keep 8th Army sharp. It was not an ambitious program or an unreasonable one in the situation. Policy was guided by restraint and limited. The only thing that would not be limited were the casualties. 8th Army's frontline fortifications are pretty impressive by now. Each U.S. Corps has had one South Korean National Guard division as a labor force, and things are looking decidedly Great War-ish in parts. Trenches are deep and narrow. There's bunkers made of logs and sandbags. The bunkers house machine guns and automatic rifles, and for the most part, they're dug in on hillsides or even on the saddles of hill crests. Larger ones on the highest hills are forward command or observation posts. Known as hoochies in the Army vernacular, the bunkers were usually built with solid overhead cover and separate living quarters behind the battle stations. Each reflected the ingenuity of its occupants in providing the comfort of homes such as cots, flooring, and furniture. Mortar positions are dug in on the reverse slopes of hills, and roads have been built specifically for tanks to come up and add their firepower either indirectly or from parapeted frontline positions. Of course, tons of camouflage and shrubbery and whatnot has been added for concealment. To sabotage and delay enemy offensives from even reaching the front lines, miles and miles of barbed wire fences have been laid, or barbed wire installations have been laid. And minefields too, designed to funnel the enemy into killing zones. There are also stockpiles of more mines, so in case of any withdrawal, they can mine their retreat. Yes, there were construction issues and structural issues, but by now, by the beginning of this month, UN Command thinks the lines are strong enough to stop anything short of, and possibly including, an absolute full-strength enemy offensive. The Kansas line was always the main defense line, but the lull this summer has given them enough time to beef up Line Wyoming and make it permanent, to the point that 8th Army Commander Jim Van Fleet has designated it the main line of defense, and only heavy losses would cause them to withdraw to Line Kansas. Now, at the eastern chunk of the line, US 10th Corps and ROK, South Korean 1st Corps, have patrol bases ahead of the main lines, maintaining contact with the enemy. This is different from the normal combat outpost system. Combat outposts give warnings of enemy attacks, but they're for fighting delaying actions only. Patrol bases give depth to the front lines and are to be defended except in all-out enemy offensive situations. They were used in Italy in World War II, but are just becoming the thing now in Korea. These can be up to 15 kilometers in front of the main lines and are on commanding territory. They're within range of their own medium artillery, so the base commanders can determine enemy positions with strong patrolling, call down strikes, and absorb initial enemy attacks. They have planned fields of fire, mines, barbed wires, tripwire flares, loads of firepower. They are tough nuts to crack, even when they're hit, fairly often, by nighttime attacks, the communist side's favorite method of attack. So Van Fleet is prepared for both defense and offense. The 8th Army shift from the passive defense was fostered by both external and internal developments. Since the enemy had used the respite on the battlefield to build up his stocks and to bring his combat units up to strength, Van Fleet wanted to probe the communist defenses, determine the disposition of the enemy troops, and prevent them from employing their mounting offensive capabilities by keeping them off balance. I said last week, 8th Army was soon to begin offensive operations in the Punch Bowl area within a few days, and this they do this week. Once again, the Punch Bowl is what the UN forces call the circular valley some 30 kilometers northeast of Hwacheon Reservoir, which is ringed by hills. The KPA, North Koreans, have held the north, west, and east of the Punch Bowl, though in late July, US 2nd Division got a foothold in the western hills and set up a patrol base there on Hill 1179. Bad weather has delayed any follow-up operations, but the skies have cleared, so it's on. The attackers this week are ROK units. The most important gain during the summer was a sharp increase in the effectiveness of the ROK Army. UN artillery gradually built up to the point that Chinese mass assaults became mass suicides. They burrowed deeper into reinforced bunkers and called in hails of artillery shell. And as winter approached the bleak Asian countryside, improved logistical support meant that the UN command would be better outfitted to endure the cold. Well, that's pretty optimistic, but maybe it's fully accurate. I guess we'll have to see over the next few weeks, because yesterday the 18th, a couple of attacks began and the offensive got going. From Paeksun-yup's ROK, that's South Korean, 1st Corps, the 11th and Capital Divisions joined ROK 8th Division from US 10th Corps in attacking a J-shaped ridge northeast of the Punch Bowl. The highest peak there, Hill 1031, is about 8 kilometers from the Punch Bowl rim itself. The KPA 45th, 13th, and 2nd Divisions are well dug in on the ridge though, and resistance is stubborn from the get-go. So the week ends there with minimal progress. Also the 18th, the 36th Regiment from ROK 5th Division tries to take a ridge west of the Punch Bowl. Van Fleet had directed Major General Clovis Byers, the new commander of US 10th Corps, to eliminate enemy observation posts that directed heavy and accurate artillery fire upon Line Kansas positions from the ridge, some 2 miles west and slightly south of Hill 1179. Since Van Fleet believed that the South Korean troops lacked self-confidence and needed experience to develop faith in their own abilities, he instructed Byers to use ROK troops in the assault. Byers, in turn, attached the 36th Regiment to the US 2nd Division. The ridge in question runs east-west and has 3 peaks, the highest of which is the western one. It's sort of like a crossbar to an H-shaped mass of hills, which overlooks 2nd Division's forward positions. Here again, the first 2 days of assaults meet stubborn resistance and fail to gain ground. This is the ridge beyond Hill 1179, actually, and Van Fleet really does want to show the world the new improved ROK. 36th ROK Regiment has the tanks of B Company's 72nd Tank Battalion behind them, and as a liaison officer, has US 2nd Division's Chief of Staff Rupert Graves, and behind them, just in case, is John Lynch's 9th Infantry. It might be a tough fight for those South Koreans, though. In just these first couple days, the ROKs were brave and they tried hard. They advanced onto steep slopes plowed by a maze of deep trenches, thorny with hidden bunkers. The bunkers were fortified to withstand air and artillery pounding, and some had room for 2 platoons of KPA. Others sheltered small cannon and mortars, dug into a rubble of partially wooden slopes, obscured by morning mists. The North Korean positions were almost impossible to detect until it was too late. But maybe it's a tough fight the ROK can win. There is another hidden killer in Korea, though: disease. When the summer comes, so too do the various tropical diseases the non-Koreans are especially susceptible to. Check this out. Yellow fever injections were provided. Then it was found that men were falling sick and in some cases dying with Japanese encephalitis or sleeping sickness, and this initiated another crash immunization program. Yet more life-threatening diseases emerges. Bilharzia, caused by waterborne parasites, and the rat-borne Wales disease. Most members of the force were introduced for the first time to handheld aerosol sprays containing DDT for the control of mosquitoes carrying malaria, as well as flies which spread dysentery. Imagine how many more mosquito-borne illnesses they'd get without all that DDT to spray all over the place. Hey, you know what? The medical officer of the 3rd Battalion Royal Australian Regiment has kept pretty good records of his guys, even when they were always on the move and often in the fight. In just February and March this year, he recorded these casualties. The numbers are courtesy of Michael Hickey. Dental, 76. Eyes, 46. Ears, nose, and throat, 44. Respiratory, 58. Gastrointestinal, 58. Backache, 18. Feet, 70. Unspecified injuries, 90. Battle casualties, in other words, dead and wounded, 57. Venereal disease, 26. Renal tract, 14. Other medical conditions and diseases, 85. So, at his regimental aid post in these 8 weeks, that's 653 casualties to deal with, and 151 of those had to be evacuated. 653 casualties is like 85% of the battalion's fighting strength. Oh, and then in April, they took 92 more battle casualties, 22 of those deaths at Kapyong. It's really got to get you down that there are so many things here that can take your health or your life from you beyond just the enemy. The weather, too, can wreak some havoc. For on the 18th, the same day the new offensives begin, Typhoon Marge sweeps into the general area. And that brings me to the end of the week, with more violations, either made up or real, of the neutral zone, and new UN attacks to do things. Also, on the 14th, although the Western media is still hyped about a possible truce, 8th Army directives this day sort of say there's some pessimism in Korea because all divisions in Korea get word that the Army has requisitioned winter clothing for them. And on the 15th, China publishes a statement condemning a Treaty of San Francisco, or whatever may be signed after the upcoming San Francisco conference, which China is not invited to, which is to sort out Japan's future once and for all and formally end the state of war with Japan from World War II. Well, it's ideally supposed to do all those things. But back to the Korean state of war in 1951. All sides agreed a while ago that hostilities would continue even as peace talks did. But think of what that meant when the political and military realities of the war diverged from each other. For the soldiers, well, they can't sit around, of course. T.R. Fehrenbach writes, "An army in the field, in contact with the enemy, can remain idle only at its own peril. Deterioration of training, physical fitness, and morale is immediate and progressive despite the strongest command measures. The Frenchman who said that the one thing that cannot be done with bayonets is to sit on them spoke an eternal truth." At least for the UN troops, frustration has really set in. I mean, they're not striving for a military victory, but the talks haven't even approached any peace settlement, and the war situation is sort of the opposite of what the commanders have been taught. The orders are basically, fight on, but don't fight too hard. Don't lose, but don't win either. Hold the line while the diplomats muddle through. But I imagine that however hard it is on the commanders, it's got to be harder on the men dug in all along the lines. They may wonder, why in fact am I dug in here? Whatever orders they get to take an enemy position or some hill, they know these are limited orders with very, very small chance to have any effect on the war's outcome whatsoever. But some of them die in all of these actions. And who wants to see his comrade give his life, or maybe give his own life, for something inconsequential? As Fehrenbach also writes, there is no honor, only irony, to being the last man killed in a war. But there is honor in joining the Time Ghost Army, so we can continue to bring you all this stuff week after week. This channel's Time Ghost Army member of the week is Brad Norton, and these are the newest commissioned officers. You too can join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.